All right, so welcome everyone to this session. This is going to be a very, very interesting one. We have a very special guest with us today. And this is the systems mapping case study, where we're going to hear from Rebecca Niles some interesting examples on this tool that we were talking about last week, right? And then this is part of the third module of the learning series that the SI London Hub is organizing. And it's very good to have you all here joining and just being present in every session. So thank you very much for the commitment and for being here to learn as much as you can. So my name is Yasmin. I'm going to be your host and a facilitator today. And this is going to be a 60-minute session. This is being recorded. And we're going to have moments for Q&A throughout the session. But of course, you're more than welcome to use the chat as well to address any questions or to comment on anything that you'd like. Okay, I'm going to keep an eye on that. So just a quick structure of the session today. We're going to have this introduction for just 5 minutes, introducing our guest speaker today as well. Then we're going to have the majority of the time for Rebecca to share her examples, her case studies that she kindly prepared for us today. And then in the end, we're going to have a quick wrap up and the next steps on how to continue following this learning series with the SI London Hub. Okay. So let me just admit more people here so everyone can participate on this very, very good session. And awesome. Okay, so a bit about our guest tonight. So Rebecca Niles is the executive director of Systems Dynamics Society, in which she facilitates the spread of systems dynamics simulation modeling and systems thinking globally. She has 25 years of experience in business, leadership, and entrepreneurship in a wide range of industries such as health, energy, education, and public policy. Some of her best skills involve collaborative problem solving, strategic thinking, and international facilitation. And it's very, very good to have you here with us, Rebecca. Thank you very much for accepting this invite. And yeah, I don't want to take any more time, and I'll just give the floor to you. So
great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. Okay, let's see. One moment, and I'll have my screen up. Welcome, everyone. I'm very glad to be here. I recognize a few names here, and there are a lot of new people. So what I'm hoping to do today is just give you an introduction to some of the projects that I've used systems thinking for. And so, whoops, what just happened there? Sorry. There, okay. I'm trying to move things around on my screen, I apologize. So I'm trying to give you some examples of what I've worked on. So there's obviously a lot more out there that members of the System Dynamics Society have focused on, but I'm going to focus on things that I intimately know. So you'll have a chance to ask any questions that you have on that. So I've got 4 different case studies for you today. Just a few more things about me. I just want to clarify that I come from the System Dynamics School of Systems Thinking. So there are many schools of systems thinking. I was formerly trained with Jay Forrester in his pre-college education project and with John Forrester in the MBA program at Sloan. So you'll see that I use a lot of formal tools, including system dynamic simulation models and causal loop mapping. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on today. However, I have as Yasmin pointed out, my background is very diverse. I have not only practiced in system dynamics. I think of myself as a generalist, more of a strategy consultant who uses systems thinking. And I have worked in a variety of fields. So I have no expertise in any one particular area, but more recently I have actually practiced a lot in health. So you'll see that all the examples here are health related. So in this hour, I'm going to go through 4 different case studies and make a few different points with them. The first is from a Department of Health, a secret Department of Health. Another one is an environmental testing company. The third one is the Minnesota Department of Health. And then the fourth one is examples from Rethink Health and how we have used systems thinking mapping to further our work. So hopefully it'll provide a diversity of things despite being heavily health focused. You can ask me questions throughout. As Yasmin said, I'm pretty flexible in my presentation style. This is a fairly small group of people. So if you want to put something in chat, Yasmin is told that she can interrupt me, but there are also going to be stopping points after each one so that we can ask specific questions. I do have the fire hose approach of MIT ingrained in me. So there's a lot of material to cover. My intent is to give you a feel for what's going on here and how people are using systems mapping. So you'll get a pretty good overview, I think, of the process and the results and some of the major findings and leaps forward that people got. So I'm hoping that will be interesting to you. I'm just curious in the chat if we could start out, because I did mention that I know some of you, but there are many of you that I don't know. I'm curious how many of you are actually, and you can just answer in the chat, whether you're practitioners and you're using systems mapping, you're very comfortable with causal loop diagrams, or whether this is something that you're just learning about right now, you're trying to understand how it works. If you could just quickly in the chat give me a feel for your level of experience. First intro to systems mapping. Okay, great. Okay, Joss, of course, you're teaching systems mapping. We appreciate that very much. So first beginner, first intro. Okay, so just learning. Okay, so this will hopefully, so a couple of people have been at it, using it, learning how to break into this field, using it in your PhD study. Okay, great. So of course, we usually have a diversity of folks, and it sounds like this might be a little heavier on the beginner stuff. So what I want to, just to set your expectations, what I'm not doing here is teaching you how to do a causal map. I will have a very brief intro for those of you. Unfortunately, I'm going to tease you a little bit before we do that. So we'll dig in a little bit in a way that I teach people systems thinking usually. The approach that the folks that I worked with use is that we teach it as you need it. And so I'll start to show you some maps and explain things and you can see it. And then we'll dig in a little bit. You'll get a chance to kind of practice a very, very tiny bit, but you're going to come out of this not knowing how to do it, or maybe even understanding the language completely, but hopefully getting a feel for how the process works, what the results look like, and some understanding of what it is. And hopefully within this work and future work, you'll get a deeper grounding in systems mapping. It's a tool that seems very simple. The language is very simple, but it takes a lifetime to learn. We're constantly learning about how to use it and do it better. So yeah, so let's see. Okay, I'm gonna have a power problem that I'm gonna have to deal with. So the first case study is, I've titled this section, Understanding Feedback to help focus design thinking. So this was for a state Department of Health. And I joined up with someone who was doing a design thinking workshop. And what we did is we melded our two practices together. The idea being that we can focus a design thinking process better if we first develop a map of the challenge and help them to identify leverage points and areas that they should think about in order to inform their design. And so we did that before I guess there was some pre-work done through interviews, and then we had a 2-day session. And the first day, it was primarily about the causal loops. They learned mapping, they developed their map. Overnight, I transformed it into a map for them to view, and we used it the next day to kind of review it and go through the design thinking process. So there were about 30 people, mostly internal folks, thinking about how to facilitate the connection of individuals to needed resources across health and human service providers. So this was an IT infrastructure group, and they were actually looking to build tools to facilitate connecting patients to community-based organizations. And they wanted to think about what those products were, because they had a substantial amount of money to invest in that. And so the design thinking portion of the meeting was to come up with some ideas for what they would do. And so what I have here, so they had, and I'm going to have to switch, unfortunately, to another thing, but they had, sorry, the Zoom stuff's in the way. Okay, so they had done a series of interviews, and they had pulled together a map of the system. And I'm going to call this a spaghetti diagram. So they had brought in, someone who had some systems thinking training, and the tool Kumu.io, which you might be familiar with. It's a very powerful tool for systems mapping that allows you to tell stories. I'm showing you it in its kind of messiest state right now. So they had pulled together all these conversations, interviews with folks, and they had what I would call a spaghetti diagram. And so here you can get a feel for what that looked like. It was a very large map, and they were sort of struggling with what to do with that. And that's when they called me in to kind of work on it as a systems thinking, from more of a systems thinking perspective. And so I just wanted to show this to you because I want to compare and contrast that, which you might have seen a lot of if you've heard of systems thinking. It's very easy to create a map that shows all these connections. But what we really wanted to do was to help them understand how they could intervene in the system, where this leverage was. So what we did is we came in and worked with this group. We trained them on the fly, so you can see, and we're going to go through this causal loop language shortly. We trained them on the fly how to do causal loop maps, and we had them start to map their system. So you can see we walked them through exercises here. This is a fixes that fail, and we'll have you do that as well. So it's an archetype in systems thinking. It's a very easy entry into systems thinking, and we had them work on this so that we could start to build the map. So we build it collaboratively with them. They do what we call behavior charts here. So they start talking about how the system is changing over time, and then they try to create these causal maps, these causal loops, in order to explain this behavior. And so this is the process of systems thinking, understanding the behavior, and then creating these maps in order to do it. And we do it, and typically it's often done in a very collaborative process. It can be done in an expert way, but in my practice, it's typically done collaboratively with the people who understand the system. I come in as a process person, not as an expert in their field, and rely on that. So here is the causal map that was created with this group after the first day. And you can see that I'm having some. Okay, so you can see this causal map. What you can see here are the dots that they put on this causal map. So we've got a bunch of loops here that are kind of driving the system. So here we have complicating regulation, which is holding them back. We have a focus on early adopters, which is affecting things. Competition is limiting what's going on. And so there are a lot of different forces that they identified. And then what we did with this map was we used it to try to identify leverage points. So you see these dots, which is where they think the major issues are in the system that are preventing everything else from doing what they want to have happen. And so while all models are wrong, some are useful. And so this is a common quote within the field. So all models are wrong. We have models in our head. They're oversimplified. We're acting on them all the time. What we're trying to do with these causal maps is pull these models out of our head, combine the models of everyone else, and present them in a way that allows us to understand how to intervene in the system. And so I have an example here of two different models. The first, spaghetti diagram, which was, it was really interesting. It showed all these connections, but it didn't show these feedback loops, these loops that determine the behavior of the system, which they were trying to change. And so a model that uses systems thinking causal maps with feedback is still wrong, but what we find is that it's more useful. And so with this map, we were able to identify a number of leverage points that they had not previously considered. some of them were sort of outside of the realm of their consideration even. So for example, this first one, so they, as I mentioned, had been, their goal was to go out there and create a system that would allow them to connect, to find all those patients who needed help by collaborating with the hospitals and the doctors who are treating them, and then get them to these service providers. And that was their goal in the system. And they were thinking just about how to do that really well, how to find all those patients, make it really easy for them to get transferred to these service providers. But what they were ignoring was the fact that if they were successful, if they were successful in their care coordination, they were successful, their efforts to expand care coordination went up, care coordination was going to go up, which was going to cause all these patients to be screened and referrals to these community-based organizations. But given the limited community-based organization capacity, availability was going to be low, and that was going to hamper their results. And so what we saw here was that there was this, if they were successful, and this was the loop that they were focusing on, that was their entire mandate, was to do this. They were going to bump into this, what we call a limits to growth, to their success that was going to limit them. And they needed to consider that in their design. And so what we did is we focused their attention on this, had them think very deeply about how they could best incorporate this into their design to make sure that they weren't going to fail through their success. And so this was essentially the project there, and it was that was a very big insight for them. It's not that you couldn't figure it out, but by getting everybody into the room, having them think about this problem, we were able to illuminate this and get them to focus on it in their design and change the designs that they proposed for their projects. And we think that that made it a much better result. I'm going to open it up for questions. I don't know if there's any questions right now. And I'm going to go, I need to get a plug for something. So I'll, Yasmin, if you have questions, if you could share them with me.
Yeah, so people feel free to just put your questions here on the chat. Yeah, I'm happy to read them, or you can address them yourselves.
Okay, so what I'm going to do next, oh, are there any questions there?
No, nothing so far.
Okay, so this was one quick example of what we've done, and what I'd like to do now is do an exercise with you guys where we talk about these loops so that you can understand a little bit better and read them a little bit better. So let's do that. Okay, so I'd like to start with the language of loops. And this is a cartoon. How many of you guys have seen this cartoon before? How many of you have not seen this cartoon before? You can just enter in chat if you haven't seen it. Not seen. Okay, so this is new to some of you. So this is in my mind the essential, the most basic cartoon that demonstrates what systems thinking, system dynamics is all about. Here we have Bob. He's he's got a problem. He doesn't have enough space. So like all of us, we all have a problem. We're looking at our landscape around us, what we know, and we're trying to figure out what to do. And we do something. We act. We often act very quickly. In this case, he's acted. He's pushed that domino down, and you can see what happens over time. It comes down and it crushes him. And so he's looked at his limited view of things, his map, his mental model in his mind, and he has acted. What we see here is that, it's many times we're just thinking about that immediate cause and effect. And what we're trying to do with systems thinking is to think about how that plays out, how those feedback loops, what we call feedback loops, play out, because that's what actually causes the interesting change, is these feedback loops. So when we press that first domino, how does it play out over time and come back to affect us? Sometimes this is really, really delayed. And what might happen to Bob here as he's doing this? So he's solved this problem in the short term. What might happen to him in the chat? You can put something in the chat. Yep. So, yep, how you do something and it makes your work more positive. So he gets kicked. You're saying he gets fired, Sabina? You guys can turn on, there's only 29 people here. If somebody wants to talk, it would make it more energetic if you guys want to turn on your volume and talk.
No, he will get a reaction of his actions.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So he gets an action for his reaction, but what else might?
Reactions.
Yep. So eventually it's gonna come down, it's gonna crush him. It's a balancing loop. As Frank said, it's gonna kind of make things, well, it's actually a reinforcing loop. I think the balancing loop in this case, Frank, is him pushing it down. He had a problem, and we'll see that later. He had a problem and he fixed it, and that made it better. But and so what is likely to happen to him is, he bought some company and it increased profits in the short term, and he's going to get a rate. He's going to get a raise and a bonus and a promotion. And he's going to move out of there, and someone like someone else is going to move into his position, and that's the person who's going to get hit by that domino. So these systems are very complex. We lash out, we do something, it might have short-term positive effects, but in the long term it causes trouble, and that makes it very difficult for us to understand and attribute things to our actions. And so systems thinking is about trying to understand how this works, how those connections are, what else is in there, as you mentioned, that there might be someone else back here who's going to get hit by it in another organization, and then sort of a lot of things topple and everything comes tumbling down. But what we're trying to do with systems thinking and causal mapping and system dynamic simulation is to allow Bob here to stand up on that chair and see what the system is before he acts. And to do that, not just by thinking about his little brain and what he sees, which is just these two dominoes, but understanding what someone over here might see, or what any of you in the system might see, what different functions in a system might see, different levels of the organization might see. And so what systems thinking and causal mapping and other tools in the field do is provide the ability to kind of capture this information and make it visible to other people so that we can improve our understanding of these dominoes and make better decisions that won't ultimately crush us, things that are more sustainable solutions. So that's what it's all about. This encapsulates systems thinking so beautifully here. Now, the language that we use for these dominoes is called the causal loop language. There may be other terms for it, but that's what I call it, the causal maps, causal loop language here. So it's a fairly simple language. It's got a very small number of parts, but it's hard to apply, and it's hard to apply well. So what we have is, and I'm going to go over this very quickly because I don't want to take the whole meeting for this. I want to give you some more examples of how it's used, but we have variables, and you have to be very specific about these because we're trying to change the system. So these variables need to be changeable. So when you see that spaghetti diagram map, you see maps that many systems thinkers put out there, you'll see that those maps may not be careful about their variables. The whole idea of systems thinking and systems mapping is to create a map where you can change the outcome. So you need these variables to be changeable. You can imagine hunger going up, you can imagine hunger going down, you can imagine eating going up, you can imagine eating going down. So we've got variables. And this is fairly specific in our language because, again, we're talking about modeling a system so that we can change it. Then there are links. So these are links between two variables, and they are actually causal relationships. They're not intended to be correlation. They're intended to imply that we believe that hunger has an effect on eating. Hunger causes a change in eating, and it goes from one variable to the other. So hunger causes eating. We also have, and so in this case, the links, there are actually two kinds of links. There are same or plus positive links, or O or opposite links. There are different ways that people define them, but same links change in the same direction, and O links change in the opposite direction. So if hunger goes up, what happens to eating? You can just put it in the chat or yell it out. If hunger goes up, does eating go up or down?
Down.
If hunger goes up, what happens to eating usually? If you're hungry, do you do more or less eating?
It goes up.
Say again. Yeah,
It
so
goes up.
it's typical, now maybe not always the case. If hunger goes up, the direct effect is that you will eat. All else, and so whenever we do these things, it's all else being equal. All else being equal, we would expect people to eat. And we signify that with an S or a positive link. I use an S with a layperson audience, and I use positive if I'm working with engineers or people who are familiar with feedback theory. So if hunger goes up, eating goes up, they move in the same direction. And then there's also, of course, a relationship between eating and hunger. If eating goes up, what happens to hunger? Does it go up or down? It goes down. So typically your eating would cause your hunger to go down. So we would put an O or a negative. And so this is the sign of the link. And this is very important in systems thinking, because if you don't communicate these, so if you see a spaghetti diagram and it doesn't have S's and O's, it's a less useful model because you don't even know what they think is the relationship between these two things. So it's very helpful to know what that relationship is, because you can know what that, how they think the system is going to change based on perturbations in that. And so it's very important to include those when you're doing a systems model. The other part of the language is the loop notation. So there are two kinds of loops. There are balancing loops or negative reinforcing loops, and there are reinforcing loops or positive feedback loops. So you know, depending on who you work with, you might hear different things. So here, hunger goes up, eating goes up, it causes hunger to go down. We call that a balancing loop. So when you push it up in one direction, it goes through the loop and it pushes back. It's balancing out that behavior. A reinforcing loop would be if hunger goes up, eating goes up, hunger goes up, eating goes up, it just keeps growing or it keeps falling. And so those are the two different kinds. And so this one is a balancing loop. And so the final component, so again, it's a very simple language that is very rich in use, is a delay. So in this case, would you say that there's, assume you have a full refrigerator in your house, hunger goes up, eating goes up, hunger goes down. Which of those links has the bigger delay? Between eating and hunger, or between hunger and eating, assuming you have a refrigerator with lots of snacks in it? Oh, sorry, I'm having trouble seeing the chat. So which of those would be longer? Yasmin, can you read results? I'm having trouble scrolling through the chat.
Sure, yeah.
Oh, hunger.
Just put
hunger and eating.
And
okay.
eating, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So hunger and eating. So typically, so imagine you have infinite food, you can just go in there and grab a snack, but it's going to take maybe 20 minutes for you to start to feel full. And so you might continue eating. And that's what causes some, people to overeat, is this delay in the system. And it can cause, it's interesting when you have a delay in the system. And so I like to define these in a causal map, because they are often leverage points in a system. And so we do that with hash marks usually, and you can use like 3 or 4 or more to signify different things. So this is the essence of the language. This is, pretty much all you need to know in order to read it, but it takes a while to learn, because we don't think this way. We're taught in everything we do to think in sort of single cause and effect, and not to think very deeply about it in this way. But what we're trying to do when we do a system map is to find these loops, because it is these loops that cause change. So as it's this balancing loop here, this homeostatic loop that makes our hunger go away. But it's interesting and rich and complicated because there's this delay in it, which might cause us to overeat and make us feel too full and cause us not to eat for a while. Okay. Yep. So and yes, so this is an oversimplification. I'm just showing you the language here, but Eduardo, there are a lot of other variables, and that's why the map that you saw that I produced before had a lot of stuff. So any system is a combination of all of these loops interacting with each other to cause the behavior, and so access to food could be pulled in to this map, and that would have a huge effect on it and change things such that the eating doesn't happen and the hunger continues to rise. And so it's important, and that's what we're trying to do in the process that I use, which is to elicit this from people and try to really understand all the myriad of things that are happening so that we can start to target where we need to focus on the system, where the leverage points are. So it may be that it's access to food. In the last example that I gave you, in my mind, the leverage point, or the thing that was going to cause them the most trouble as we kind of looked at all of the things they brought up, was this fact that if they were successful, they were going to fail. There was this balancing loop there. So if we go back to that, you would notice that, and you'll have access to this presentation, you'll notice in the simple model I did, there was a balancing loop there. There was a limit there, and that was going to thwart any success that they had. Okay, so what I'd like to do is just go through a couple more system stories just to give you a feel and give you a very short chance to birth your first loop. Your first loop here. So this is a road down in Texas outside of Houston. It's about 5 lanes long. They've obviously added a lot of lanes, but you still see congestion. And it just so happens that it takes about an hour and a half to get from some of the towns in order to get here. And they keep adding the roads, and it still keeps coming back. So what is happening here? As we add more roads to reduce congestion, what happens? Yep. Why are there more cars on the road, Alexandra? And you can speak if you'd like to.
Well, because now they fit.
They fit more cars. So what happens? So now suddenly the commute's gone down to only 30 minutes because they've just added 2 more lanes. Then what happens? What happens in the system?
It goes back to the level of congestion, or.
Mm-hmm. But why do more cars come in? Like what is happening? What all is going on in the background?
Oh, Eduardo,
why do more cars
attracts more cars?
It attracts more cars. Okay, yeah, and there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things that go on here. One thing is that suddenly it's like really a beautiful commute, and so it becomes very popular, and so builders start building more things. So they'll start to build a lot of communities because people want to live there because it's easy to get to, and that will cause that congestion to go up. There are many other things that could happen. Just the fact that it's gone down can lead to more people coming in. So we can capture this in a causal map, and this is one way to capture it. As traffic congestion goes up, widening roads goes up, and I'm breaking my rule. I'm leaving out the S's and the O's, but this is an S and this is an O. As widening roads goes up, traffic congestion goes down. So this is pushing on that domino. We widen that road, but after a delay, we see the attractiveness to commuters and developers going up, and that leads to the traffic congestion. So what you said, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on. As soon as it becomes attractive, a lot of people start doing things. And so we can capture that in this causal loop. Okay, so the second example is antibiotics and antibacterial soap. We've seen a huge increase in the use of antibiotics and antibacterial soap with COVID. What happens when we do that to improve health?
There's an imbalance now of the good and the bad bacteria. So that would probably be one of the first effects, and then more of the bad bacteria come back.
Right, more of the bad bacteria come back. Yeah, and there's probably, Eduardo, there's probably also something in here about our bodies becoming less resilient. We diminish self-protection. That's not what I've got in the example, but that's a very good point as well. And again, all models are wrong, but what we're trying to do is expand on it. And if I were really working with you guys on building this out right now, I would start with my model and kind of modify it based on yours. So here, sort of one of the major things that we see is what was said earlier, that increasing the use of antibiotics and antibacterial soap leads to the remainder of these these stronger, more resistant strains of bacteria and allows them to thrive. And so we can capture that in a causal map here. As infectious disease goes up, like COVID, use of antibacterial products goes up. So that's the same, which causes infectious disease to go down in the short term. And so it makes a lot of sense and we do a lot of it, but over time, it's going to lead to more bacterial resistance, which will increase infectious disease here. And so we would also probably want to add in a loop about our ability to resist, which would also lead to infectious disease. So you could add that as well. Another example is suppressing forest fires. I did some work with the U.S. Forest Service, and it was really interesting just to learn about their savior ethos. They had a strategy where they were so proud of their ability to go out there and just fight all those fires. They would go out really quickly and just stamp them all out. What happens when we suppress forest fires? Anyone?
More fuel accumulates.
More fuel accumulates, right? So fires become more prevalent, exactly. And so what we see here is we end up getting more, stronger buildup of debris, which fuels future fires. And so if forest fires go up, we stamp them out, and that leads to an accumulation, of dead wood, which leads to more forest fires. So Eduardo, I think it was you that mentioned that you would like to see us add more stuff, and we're not going to do that today. I'd be happy to come back at another time, and we could work to build maps together. But it's as simple as here we talked about individual resistance. I would add a variable here, which is individual resistance. So as use of antibacterial products goes up, I would put individual resistance goes up. As individual resistance goes up, likelihood of catching disease goes up, which causes infectious disease to go up. So it's just a matter of adding something else. And that would be another reinforcing loop here that was named. So you can just keep building it on from that base of the problem that you're trying to solve. Here's your solution, and these are the side effects. And so I've just shown it here for you guys. You can look as traffic congestion goes up, widening roads goes up, which causes traffic congestion to go down. So in the short term, again, lashing out, solving the problem, just like Bob and the Domino Man. But in the long run, after that delay, attractiveness goes up, which means that's the same, and that causes traffic congestion to go up, which is the same. And so you can keep adding those kinds of things on. And what's interesting, again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to change a system. And so what this directly determines the way the system behaviors over time. So we see that when this balancing loop is dominant, we call it loop dominance. When this is dominant, we see that traffic congestion will go down. They built that new road, and suddenly, it takes half the time to get in there. But what we find is that then we've got this reinforcing loop, and it comes back, and maybe it doesn't go up like this, but it comes back to where it was, or it gets a little bit worse. Because maybe you overbuilt. And so you see that it comes back. And at least in the US, I think it's probably different in other places, but in the US, we seem to tolerate about an hour and a half commute. And so that tends to be where things revert to over time. And so again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to change the course of this behavior over time. And so we're trying to create a model, a better, more usable model to help us do that. And as you get deeper into systems mapping, you start to realize how these things connect to this. If you use computer simulation, which if you have a solid computer map, you can then take the next step and turn it into a computer simulation, and you can actually simulate these things. And so that's what we're striving for with a systems map, is creating a model which really helps us to understand how important variables are going to change.
Well, Eduardo has a question here. Is it
Yep.
enough to show these modules, or do you have to back it up with data to your audience?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's different schools of thought on this. You know, in the system dynamics community, we have a diversity of opinions. Some people think that it's not worth doing this without a model and all of that data to back it up. I am in the school that feels like you can get a lot of benefit. So again, it can be useful to have a map that does not have data behind it. And of course, there are degrees in between where you could take a map and you can go and just verify that those things are a certain, that those things are true, first of all. And then you can, some people go through and they verify sort of the strength of the connection, or, you know, they start to put some numbers around it so they can understand what's stronger. So there are gradations. I would argue that, and I think in my practice, we've tended to help people use systems thinking quickly to make decisions. So as I mentioned, I think all of these examples, except the last one, are sort of 2-day sessions where we're really quickly helping them think better strategically. And so the map without numbers is better than the map that's in an individual's head. A shared map built by multiple people who understand different parts of the system without numbers is better than what we're usually operating on. A system dynamics model that is well, documented with data is significantly better than a model, but it, kind of depends on what you have the appetite to do, the timeline and the funds to do. And so that would be my answer. Kareem, who is on here, might argue differently. We debate about this all the time in the System Dynamics Society. Now, one thing in our practice, we find that you can come to interesting, essentially boundary expansions when you do these 2-day things. So you get people to consider things that they were ignoring before, and you can do that without data. And when we do these 2-day sessions, which was sort of a birth that GK incorporated by Janet Gould and David Kreutzer, who were the principals of that. The idea was you don't want to get bogged down in data because you want to have these systems thinking insights that are important, that can redirect your attention because you might be asking the wrong questions, collecting the wrong data. This by ignoring the data and just going with general impressions or the behavior of the system without actual data points, you can get these insights quickly. And then you can go back and verify and check and make sure and put numbers to it. So it's a complicated question. It's an important question. So I appreciate that. Other questions on this?
Yeah, there's Sabina. Can be the data analysis done in SPSS?
Say it one more time.
Can the data analysis be done in SPSS?
I am not familiar with SPSS. Does someone else know SPSS? Can someone else answer that question?
Package, Rebecca.
Kareem, thank you. Go ahead, Kareem. Take the floor.
It's a statistical package. So yes, you can do
Okay.
some in SPSS. You might want to use other things to do that. But I agree with Rebecca. You generally don't want to be focusing on the data before you have these relationships figured out, and then that points you to what data you might need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if you start with the data and you have a data focus, you're often focusing on the wrong question. A lot of the more interesting stuff is either held outside of your organization or you just don't collect the data because it's hard or you haven't thought of it before. And so definitely agree with that. Now, the key takeaway to this, and this has been a really interesting discussion, but the key point of this section was that structure drives behavior. The reason we do systems thinking is to understand that structure so that we can change that behavior. This structure, very importantly, includes feedback loops. It's not just a mass of connections in that spaghetti diagram. It's a bunch of balancing and reinforcing or positive and negative feedback loops, depending on how you want to define them, that determine the change in the system. And so there's a lot to learn about how those combinations work together to create what you want. Yep. Jonas, I'm glad to hear that Kareem and I are in the same school of thought on that. Getting the bigger picture before you jump in to modeling. Modeling is like invaluable, and it can solidify things. And obviously we can't do this complex math in our head. It's been proven over and over again that even MIT rocket scientists can't entirely predict what's going on, even with a very simple model. And that's where system dynamics models come in and help a lot. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is I'm going to go quickly through a couple of other examples for you so you can see what some of these mapping projects look like, if I can get my screen to move. Thank you, Kareem. A dynamic hypothesis. So for some reason, my screen, okay, there. That was the questions. If there are any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but I do have some other examples to get through if my computer will cooperate. Okay, so this next example is another Department of Health. In this case, we're helping policymakers understand the connections between incarceration and health. This was for the Minnesota Department of Health, and it was done as a special project of Rethink Health, sort of expanding the boundaries of their Rethink Health dynamics model, which if you haven't seen it, you should check out. So in this case, we were called in to work with 35 people within the criminal justice system and beyond to understand the issues, opportunities, and obstacles that impacted incarcerated individuals in their attempt to lead truly healthy lives. It was intended to be part of a policy paper for the Minnesota State Legislature. In this case, again, it was a 2-day session where we collaboratively mapped. We taught them systems thinking. So, we showed some of the same slides I just showed you here. And as we went, we taught them how to do it, and they were doing it themselves. In systems mapping, one of the interesting things about systems mapping is that you can do it as an expert. You can, interview people and you can draw up these causal maps, but as you can see, they're quite complex, and it's very hard to understand them if you were not involved in creating them. So we have a tendency to do this live with people. And there's a lot of benefit to that. There is a process that I use that is similar to processes that other people use, where we start where people are and we elicit their ideas. We use hexagons here, and you can see that process. It's facilitated up front. And then we guide them through, we teach them about behavior over time charts, which are critical to systems thinking, because what we're trying to do is change this. So we need to start looking at it. And it can be eye-opening to people to start to talk about things over time, because we tend to look at single data points. And this is a big part of systems thinking and systems mapping, is to actually incorporate behavior charts into your practice. And then, we use that to help focus our systems work here. And so you can see, and this is probably labeled, well, it does show it 2 reinforcing loops, I think. So it is not a fixes that fail, but this is where they were, starting to come up with their dynamic hypothesis, as Kareem says here, in order to, define the system. And so here, you can see the map. It's a little bumpy here, and I could have simplified this for you, but I didn't. And I'll put this online, and you can read the full report and the legislative report where it was mentioned. There are probably other reports that I'm not aware of, but so essentially what's going on here is we have 4 cascading things going on. So when you incarcerate people, they have sort of this yellow stuff is sort of all the personal things that are happening to them. So, they get sick, they're released, and they have fewer opportunities for housing and employment, and that leads to recidivism, and they tend to come back. And so there are a lot of reinforcing loops that are keeping people incarcerated. And then that is kind of expanding because it's leading to ACEs, sort of a trauma within a family unit, which leads them to be more likely to, to become incarcerated. And so you've got this additional effect on a family, which is exacerbating it and leading to growth in incarceration. And then, what this group told us was that also leads to erosion of a community. And so because you have, the individuals and then their families, they're affecting their community. And through a variety of different factors, and that's leading to an erosion of the communities, all of which is leading to a growth in the prison population. And then interestingly, the thing that they left off, it was actually a quite challenging conversation to have, kind of tiptoeing around racism and sort of the police public safety stuff. So we had this additional loop here that as I was reading the report again, I noticed got deleted. But the sort of, as we were thinking about it strategically, there was sort of this discussion, and you can see here, we've put in the green things, which are, different places where they felt one could intervene in the system. And, they were sort of in this conversation, they were saying, well, what we need to do is we need to focus on public education and dialogue to reduce this perceived threat to public safety and sort of, reduce the strictest of policing and sentencing. And they really wanted to focus here. But what this set of loops here, this kind of crime crackdown is how we're dealing with all these incarcerated people and this erosion of communities and all this stuff that's going on, is we're kind of fixing it here. But there are all these things here that are just fighting against it, because, if you're cracking down and you're putting people in incarceration, then you're creating this factory that creates, that makes it really, causes the incarcerated people to spiral downward, because we have no support for them when they come out. It's causing all these impacts on their health and their community. And all of this is, leading to perceived threat to public safety, because things are happening here. And so because of these and this, movement in, if you don't sort of fix this, it's going to be really hard to get out of this. And so, doing all this public education and dialogue here is not going to help when you've got sort of all this crime going on in the community. And so it becomes a really interesting map, and it could probably be simplified to make that point a little bit more. But there's sort of the, should they be spending all their money on public education and dialogue, or should they really be pushing on these levers over here to overcome them and let this sort of happen more naturally as we reduce crime and help people to live healthier lives? And so that was this one. It, I don't know that it turned into action, but it was, seen by the legislature, and at least they're now aware that there's this like big cycle of incarceration growth. Any questions on that, Yasmin?
No questions. We have just Janos asking for some tips on tools to create visual exploration systems maps.
Yeah, it's actually really hard, and I'm going to call on Kareem as well. So I really like kumu.io because you can share it, and I think I have a link to one up here. When I flashed you over to that, actually it's not. I'll actually add a link to one that has the causal map in it so you can see it. It does require some ability to deal with programming. Exchange IC is good. So I've used IC Systems Stella Architect for mapping, and I've used Vensim for mapping. I think there are some other things, and I think a lot of people have put stuff in here. But you can even do it in PowerPoint, but that's super hard. So, probably the easiest ones to use are the system dynamics simulation tools, like Stella Architect and Ventana Systems, but you have to get their software. Kumu you could do for free, but it's public, and it actually is I think it's a much bigger learning curve. But it's interesting because you can build stories around it. Okay, I just wanted to really quickly show you this other one, just so you're aware of it. And I think we have like 1 minute left, so we can cut off. But so this was using causal mapping for essentially a theory of system change. And so this was the Rethink Health project, which is a big simulation model that has been in use throughout the United States. So tens of thousands of people have used it. It's a 1 decade long project. Here, what we used, and there are a few slides about it. So it's a computer simulation based on system dynamics. It pulls all this data together. You were asking about data into a framework. It's trying to increase the triple aim and beyond. So it's very complex, 25 different initiatives that you can figure out. So they used systems mapping at the beginning for that dynamic hypothesis and to build the model. But in engaging with a huge number of people and working with this model, they were able to come up with a sound strategy for regional population health. And this is, they have marketing people. They spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to communicate it very well to people. And so this is a very nice causal map that's used as their theory of system change, or the theory of system change that we can share with communities. So you take initial startup funds, which are usually very dear. It's hard to get them. You invest them in the programs first, starting with things that quickly reduce cost. So we have these 25 things, only some of them quickly reduce cost. So you start there, and then you make a deal with the key thing here is this loop that you see over the whole thing, is that you take that money and you make deals with the insurance companies, Medicare, Medicaid, and the commercial insurers, in order to get back some of the return of the investment. And then you invest that further in programs to do more of the cost savings, but also to invest in healthier behaviors and the environment and other things that are more upstream, preventative, social determinants of health. And then you save even more money and you get these broader benefits beyond just health. And then you save more. So you're continuing to get money for these people from the insurers, and you continue investing them in programs. And eventually the model shows that you can save so much money if you take this strategy that you can start investing in poverty alleviation so that more people are healthy, and that generates more money. And so this is a very simple causal loop diagram that's very powerful. If we could get this done in the United States, when all the nonprofits are investing in things, the money isn't just going to the hospitals or the insurers, but is coming back and being invested in a thoughtful way over time, then there can be dramatic change. And so we're using this in the model to do this. Yep. And then this is just another one for you to be aware of. This is a standard systems thinking archetype. So I showed you the fixes that fail archetype, those 3 examples. This is another archetype that is very important in health and just generally in philanthropy. And this is a stylized version of it from Rethink Health. And there's some exercises that are freely available to use, which teach it. The idea is that we tend to focus on the caring. It's very quick. There's pressure to, house people who are homeless and, get them emergency services, or, treat your headache with aspirin. And we tend to do that when there are things that are more fundamentally enhancing. And the problem in systems is that when we care for things, it usually takes a lot of money and effort. And so we tend to start to rely on those things, and it leaves us unable to do the things under enhancing. And so this is a very important archetype and systems thinking that could be used, and just a good example for you to see. So I think we're over time here, but I've gotten to the meat of it, and just wanted to let you know the System Dynamic Society is here. We have a lot of resources to help folks with this. I am not just an administrator, I'm a practitioner in the field. And so the society can help you find people to, help you find ways to learn in addition to systems innovation, and can help you to connect with people who could either do things for you, or there is a tendency within our field to try to teach other people. I think the society and most practitioners I know are really committed to helping other people learn to be systems thinkers and to use these tools. So would welcome you to reach out to me, and my contact information is in this, which I will get into the Kumu or the Miro board for you, so that you can see all these materials and you can connect if you need support, further support and learning. And I'm looking forward to, working with Yasmin and Joss to build better ties between systems innovation and us, so that we can help build your skills in this way.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Okay.
Thank you enough for this great presentation. And yeah, I'm sure a lot of people got a lot of value from today's session. So yeah, it was great. And I'm sure people are going to come back to this recording to learn a bit more and to be more focused on some things that you said today. So thank you very much for being here with us. And yeah, since we are in the end of our session, I'm going to leave the Miro board link here with you. We're going to update with some PDFs, some resources that Rebecca was mentioning, and this presentation is going to be available afterwards in this Miro board as well. So I'm going to quickly share my screen with you so we can finish our session. So I put here Rebecca's contact if you want to connect with her on LinkedIn, and of course, Systems Dynamics Society to just check out the amazing work that they do. So I put the links here, just access here, clicking on the top right. And what's next in our learning series? 2 weeks from now, we're going to start our introduction to systems change. So here you have the link as well with the description of how the session is going to be. So this is the next step in our learning series. And as always, here you can find the information to be connected with the SI London Hub, so website, LinkedIn, the YouTube where this recording and all the other recordings that we have is going to be available, Twitter as well. And here, if you have a bit of time to just give us some feedback on how the session went for you and how we can improve on the next ones. Okay, so thank you very much everyone for participating today. Thank you again, Rebecca, for this amazing presentation. And yeah, I'm looking forward to creating more opportunities for us to learn. So
great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.